Artemis II soon to splash down, a high-risk part of this historic mission. Re-entry speed, roughly 24,000 miles per hour. Astonishing temperatures on Orion's heat shield. Good news? All systems go. Maine Democrat Graham Platner joins the show. Is the primary race against Chuck Schumer-backed Governor Janet Mills effectively over? Is Platner ready for a general election brawl? We'll ask him about that and a lot more. You might be thinking, what? Is this casual Friday at the Takeout? Well, to my mind, every day is sort of casual Friday. But no, it's Masters Friday. I only have one green blazer. A report from Augusta National. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. The 10 days of Artemis II have coexisted, we should admit, uncomfortably with the wars in Iran and Lebanon, as the world found inspiration and beauty in new images of the moon and wonder in space travel. It absorbed carnage on two battlefields and economic complications from these conflicts, splendor in the heavens, misery on the ground. Humanity, by turns, transfixed by the inventiveness and ambition of mankind and tormented by the numbing frequency of conflict driven by ideological, religious, or geopolitical differences and its many unintended consequences. As Artemis II prepares in mere hours to splash down off the coast of San Diego, there is a glimmer, gossamer thin, hope that negotiations might bring an end to the wars in Iran and Lebanon. Vice President JD Vance leading a delegation to Islamabad, Pakistan, for talks with Iranian counterparts. But the Iranians have already begun to seek concessions before these actual talks commence. And President Trump warned today of a swift return to warfighting if these negotiations fall apart. Incidentally, the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. Israel and Hezbollah forces in Lebanon traded fire today. Kuwait absorbed 7 drone attacks. None of this sounds like a ceasefire because it is one in name only, of limited value, except as a prelude, perhaps, to something more substantive. The costs are now more tangible from all this. Inflation here up 3.3% year over year. It's been driven by higher energy costs that Americans see basically everywhere. So far, and this is a bit of good news, food and other essentials comparatively stable price-wise. Price is still high, just not roaring as high as gas prices. The University of Michigan's respected consumer confidence index fell 11% to 46.6%. That is the lowest confidence level on record. Pessimism about future inflation pervaded this survey, which we should note concluded before the announced but now seemingly hollow ceasefire. If anything can kindle durable optimism, though, it appears to be Artemis II. It has captivated and, yes, unified. For more on the hours ahead and the risks that come with them, we turn, as we have throughout this mission, to our senior national correspondent, Mark Strassman, who joins us from the Johnson Space Center. Mark, set us up for what will be the end of, we hope, will be a universally successful mission.
Yeah, and so far so great, Major. I mean, right now the capsule is about 27,000 miles from Earth, moving at about 8,400 miles per hour. And the closer it gets to Earth, the faster it's going to keep moving. But think about this, 8,400 miles an hour, that certainly sounds quick. And yet, by the time it makes its reentry, it'll be traveling almost 3 times faster than that, nearly 24,000 miles per hour. And once it makes that reentry point, that's when it starts to get interesting and even dramatic. The capsule will go through 6 minutes of no contact as it makes its initial reentry. As I said, it'll be moving about 24,000 miles per hour. And that's when the heat shield that is at the bottom of the capsule really has to do its job. It's got to protect the 4 people living inside that capsule, looking to splash down in the Pacific off the coast of San Diego and return to their families. And everything so far today, Major, has been good. There have been no hiccups whatsoever. And we're just sort of waiting now for, after 9 days, for Artemis II to come home after their magical tour of the cosmos.
Mark, you and your team have provided no end of fascinating and incredibly valuable notes to all of us at CBS News. And one thing I detected is that The trajectory coming back to Earth has been adjusted from Artemis 1. Artemis 1 had a trajectory of reentry that was meant to sort of create maximum, if not maximum, very higher friction. This will still have lots of friction, but a little bit less than Artemis 1. Do I have that about right?
Yeah, it's a little complicated.
I'm
NASA
sure it
described
is.
it as it's a skip. No, believe me, it is to me. It's a skip out of into the atmosphere, then out, and then in again. And they're not going to go quite as high out when they go out, and that's supposed to help diffuse the heat, which was the issue last time. Some of the gas was trapped inside on the underside of the heat shield. It could not escape. They believe that by going out at a not quite as high, that the gas will be able to permeate through the shield again, and that will stop the shield disintegrating in chunks. That was such a worry with Artemis 1. Now, just to be clear, with Artemis 1, even though it did not have a crew, had it a crew, the crew would have been fine, according to NASA, and they really do believe that this is a solution that will solve the issue of the chunking away of the heat shield. But everybody, of course, has their fingers crossed that NASA's right. The astronauts are confident that they are. Everyone on the ground seems to be confident that they are. But the moment of proof is yet ahead for us.
Mark Strassman, as always, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. Former NASA astronaut and engineer Daniel Levas joins us now. He was on 2 space flights and completed 5 spacewalks. But most importantly, Danny, for this conversation, my producer told me that you were part of the team that investigated the heat shield after Artemis 1. What is your level of confidence about what we're going to see play out in the next few hours?
Yeah, well, the adjustment that was made by NASA to basically get away from the second reentry during the skip maneuver and go into what they refer to as a lofted maneuver. So they're going to be coming in basically the same trajectory, the same kind of steep angle, but rather than skipping out of the atmosphere, they're just going to kind of skirt the top of the atmosphere for a short distance, and that'll give them the range that they need to be able to reach the landing zone. And what they believe is that the amount of heat that is coming in will not have enough time to kind of bake the AV coat, the heat shield material. That was ultimately the problem with Artemis 1, is that when it skipped out of the atmosphere, it kind of cooled down a little bit on the outside, but the inside was still warm, and that's what was generating the gases, and the gases weren't able to escape, and that's what led to the cracking of the AV coat. This trajectory, they believe, is once the AV coat starts to do its job, it'll continue to basically convert and eventually get down deep into the atmosphere, that by the time cracking does occur, which they do expect is going to happen, it'll be now low enough and it'll no longer need any thermal protection, because you'll be down deep enough into the atmosphere and just basically continue riding it until the parachutes come out.
And Danny, I've read that the heat shield is essentially made of the same technological products of the Apollo era, which, as we all know now, is some 50 years old. Why still use things from then? Is there not something better that we could use now?
Well, that's actually a really great question. The United States is the only country on the planet that has ever brought back humans safely from the moon, right? That says a lot. And Avcoat was actually the material of Apollo was evaluated amongst other types of materials back in the early 2000 timeframe. And then once they did the evaluation, they kind of came back with the answer that the Apollo material, Avcoat, was the one that gave NASA and gave the program the confidence to know that they could do it again, and it was robust enough. And I think now that they understand the failure mode a little bit better, the subsequent builds of Artemis 3 and after, are going to be built with a Avcoat variant that will be porous enough that it'll allow the gases to escape, where this won't happen again on future missions.
How confident are you everything is going to go as planned this evening?
Well, so no space flight is without risk, and I would be lying to you if I said that there was a zero risk of something catastrophic happening. However, I have a great deal of confidence, having worked alongside, shoulder to shoulder with the engineers and the scientists who put together this material. As you said earlier, I was an independent technical reviewer who was extremely skeptical when I walked in the door. And one thing that NASA did is that regardless of what question I threw at them, regardless of what analysis we asked them to go and perform, they met the challenge and they made it, they passed in flying colors. I'm very confident of NASA's decision to launch Artemis and to bring back the home on this heat shield. I think it was the right decision to make, and I believe the data backs that up.
We could not have a better guest to help us walk us through the next few hours and the end of this historic mission. Daniel Levis, I appreciate your time very much. Thank you, sir.
Artemis.
A quick programming note. You can watch the Artemis crew splash down off the coast of, my favorite city. It's my hometown, San Diego, right here on CBS News 24/7. Special coverage comes your way beginning at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. You don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss it. Nobody wants to miss it. Vice President Vance, Jared Kushner, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, they are set to hold negotiations with Iran representatives tomorrow in Islamabad, Pakistan. Here was the Vice President a bit earlier today.
As the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive.
CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd joins me now. Sam, always good to have you here. This feels very, very thin right now. I mean, there's a chance, maybe not a big chance, but it seemed to me a chance that at the refueling stop, the president could tell the vice president, come back home, forget it. We're not going to sit down with these folks because they're already starting to play us.
Sure, but we also don't really know what we're going to be negotiating about. So typically a head of delegations leaving to meet each other, even through intermediaries, there's a sense of what they're meeting on. Are they meeting to set up a framework for future negotiations? Are they meeting to establish the terms of a ceasefire, an actual ceasefire? What's actually on the table? And at this point, Major, we don't even know if we really have a ceasefire, and we don't know ultimately what the goals are, even for the United States. We know what the Iranians' plan is, but we keep vacillating between Strait of Hormuz, nuclear program, ballistic missiles, and more. So these talks certainly don't feel like they're set up for success.
And the Iranians say pretty consistently that there has to be a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. And there are conflicting signals about whether or not that's a priority for the Trump administration, the Netanyahu government. Are they talking to Lebanon about a ceasefire? Or are they just talking to talk while military operations continue?
It is surprising to me, having been involved in negotiations to end conflicts, for hostage releases and more, that there was not actual clarity over what was included in this quote-unquote ceasefire. The fact that there's ambiguity about whether Israel would stop attacking Lebanon is surprising and just really begs a question of how much preparatory work was done prior to the announcement of the ceasefire. The same applies to the Strait of Hormuz. A precondition for the ceasefire was that the strait be open. We now know that's not true. And so there are certainly talks next week between the Israeli ambassador, Lebanese ambassador, and U.S. ambassador to Lebanon. But that's almost trying to play catch up to what the ceasefire sensibly announced a week ago.
What are you going to be looking for in the next couple of days? I mean, first of all, does the plane land in Islamabad? And does Vice President and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff get off? And do they talk to somebody? And who are they talking to? And what comes out of it?
I'm going to be looking to see if they announce or say publicly what they're negotiating about. Is this about...
What are the contours?
Is this about ending the military conflict? And if so, what are the non-negotiables? Is it Iran stepping back from control of the Strait of Hormuz? Is it Iran turning over its stockpile of highly enriched uranium?
Which the White House keeps suggesting the Iranians are prepared to do.
And the Iranians, unsurprisingly, are saying they're not. But, hey, that's negotiating.
Right.
You start with the maximalist position, and then you winnow it down. But I'm looking to see if there's any clarity from the United States about what the United States thinks we're negotiating about. And from there, if there's a structured set of meetings that are set up, I have to say it, but these meetings are complicated.
Right.
And JD Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner have their own unique backgrounds and skill sets. But I'm surprised that there is not some kind of nuclear expert accompanying them or somebody with deep background negotiating with Iran, if they're still left in the U.S. government, and there certainly are some of them there. And so I'm waiting to see if in future negotiations they do set up any technical level conversations.
From a process point of view, are you at all surprised the Secretary of State, who's also the National Security Advisor, is not leading these talks?
I'm surprised that the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor is not leading the talks. I'm also surprised at how behind the scenes he has been since the ceasefire was announced. He has been placing calls, but he has certainly been very absent from public commentary on this ceasefire. And the fact that he's not going to Islamabad, leading these talks as the country's lead diplomat and security professional official is surprising.
Puts it squarely in the White House, not at the State Department. That is a process point we will all probably be evaluating and dissecting in the coming hours.
Thanks,
Sam, always a
Major.
pleasure. Thanks so much. Democrats who are, well, thinking about running for president in 2028, at least seeking the party's nomination. Speaking at Al Sharpton's conference, that's the National Action Network conference in New York this week. Former Vice President Kamala Harris, former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg spoke today, and they came kind of close to letting people know what they might do in 2028 or the year before, which is the important year. Listen.
Are you going to run again in 28?
Listen, I might. I'm thinking about it. The one thing I'm really clear about also is the status quo is not working and hasn't been working for a lot of people for a long time.
Of course, we want to see an end to the current regime, but what we really need to make clear is what we would be doing instead, that it doesn't have to be this way, and your everyday life could be better.
Just so my calendar is clear, should I be reserving a table at Sylvia's? Are you going to run again?
You save me a seat, I'll be there.
CBS News political director Finn Gomez has the latest from New York. So when the vice president says I might, that sounds like a pretty close to a yes. But when she also says, Finn, that the status quo hasn't been working for some time, well, for 4 years, she was part of the status quo.
She absolutely was. And look, all week we've been talking to people who are the attendees here. They've been saying they've been eager to listen to some of these this parade of 2028 presidential contenders that have come to this event organized by the Reverend Al Sharpton. But the one that the most attendees were looking forward to, Major, has been Vice President Harris. And look, there were some who felt that she didn't get a square deal back in 2024, that she was hampered by President Biden and the party at the time. But what I heard today were inklings, like sort of a wink, wink, and a nod, if you will, that she's seriously considering a run. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that she was also burnishing her foreign policy credentials, really comparing herself to the current leadership in the White House, which I thought was significant. But really, that moment with Sharpton on the stage, that was really the clearest indicator yet that she's seriously considering a run and that she might major. The other reaction I got from some of her supporters, Major, after her speech was, yes, they encouraged her to run. She had a standing ovation after her comments. But there were some who also kind of wanted to had a wait and see approach. While they supported her, they liked her, but they were open to speaking and wanted to hear from other potential 2028 contenders, which I thought was interesting. I also spoke just before your show, Major, to a former senior Harris campaign official. When I asked that person about another run, they told me, while they're grateful to the former vice president, they also believe that their party is not made up of people who like to look backwards at the rear view mirror. Very striking comment there, and also representing what some people in the Democratic Party do believe. Major.
Hey, Gomez from New York. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Still to come on our show, my conversation with oyster farmer turned progressive Senate candidate and current frontrunner Graham Platner. Also, Anthropic says its new AI model is too powerful for public use because it is so good at finding software vulnerabilities. Now, top tech companies are working together to patch up their own software before Anthropic's model is eventually released. Plus, a tradition unlike any other. We take you to Augusta National to check in on the leaderboard. The Masters. Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. A series of new polls show progressive Democrat Graham Platner with a double-digit, you heard that right, double-digit lead in Maine's Senate primary over to Governor Janet Mills. We are joined now by Democratic candidate for Senate in Maine, Graham Platner. Graham, it's good to have you on the program. I appreciate you taking the time. Let me just ask you straight up. Do you believe the primary contest with you and the governor is effectively over?
I'm not. Look, I'm definitely coming at this from the perspective of somebody who was not in politics. I was an oyster farmer full time up until August of last year. And, I'm engaged in a political primary against the sitting governor who has a lot of support from the political establishment. And so for me, there's kind of, we're going to continue pushing forward the way we've been pushing forward, regardless. And in some ways, what's lucky for us is that the kind of campaign that we've built, which is so focused on organizing and so focused on being out all around the state, talking to people directly, it essentially looks the same whether or not we're in a primary or we aren't. It's this exact strategy that I think is going to build the power to beat Susan Collins come November, and we're just going to continue moving on with that.
Because it has been written that internally your campaign is really not focused on the governor anymore and is girding for a general election campaign. Is that true?
I mean, it would be true in the sense that we're just continuing to build exactly what we've been building. The electoral strategy to beat Susan Collins, in my opinion, needs to be one that is focused on engaging with Mainers directly, which means field organizing, means going out into communities and holding very public town halls, being very accessible to people. That strategy is what we've been doing since August, and we're going to continue doing exactly that. And so we haven't shifted anything, I'll be entirely honest. We're just continuing to put our energy and our time into building out that exact same kind of strategy. And we're going to keep doing it after the primary once we win, but it's going to continue looking essentially like what we're building right now.
Looking ahead to the general election, a spokesperson for the Republican Senatorial Committee said, and I quote, "As Maine's Democrat base turns to the radical liar Graham Platner, Schumer, meaning Chuck Schumer's dream of beating Susan Collins, is slipping further out of sight." How do you respond to that? A, that you're a liar, that you're a radical, and that hopes of beating Susan Collins with you leading the Democratic ticket is slipping further out of sight.
Well, I fully expect the Republican Party to say as many awful and slanderous things about me as possible. It's important to remember this is the party that said Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States, and that also tried to swift boat John Kerry. So I don't expect good behavior out of the Republicans come the general. That being said, they should read the polling. We've got a lot of consistent polling. I think at this point we're up to 12 consecutive polls, which always show my candidacy beating Susan Collins at significantly higher margins than Chuck Schumer's pick. So, I'm a Democrat in Maine. I'm wary of polling, but there is a consistency to it that engenders a bit of confidence.
Graham, there have been a lot of things said about you, things you have written on Reddit, a tattoo you had and a controversy around that. And I want to ask you this, because I don't think it's been put to you this way before. Is there anything you've done or said that you regret that did not come from the stresses you internalized from post-traumatic stress itself? That is to say, is PTSD the explanation for everything? Or did you also just make some additional human errors that you want to explain or contextualize?
Yeah, I'll be upfront. I've never laid the entire fault of my previous opinions at earlier parts of my life at the feet of only post-traumatic stress. I mean, when I left the military, I came out of a hyper-masculine, hyper-violent place. I did 4 tours in the infantry. We have a crude sense of humor in the infantry. We certainly have I would say, narrow view of a lot of topics. And that colored my opinions and my beliefs. Once I left and came out and interacted in the civilian world with lots of different people with very different experiences than my own, many of those beliefs and thoughts and even just language changed significantly over time. I didn't have some of those. I mean, some of that was not because of my combat service, but much of it was because of the culture I had come out of. And over the years in between, I've met a lot more people, had a lot more experiences, learned a lot more about the world, and my opinions have changed with it.
You have said recently that 2 Supreme Court justices deserve to be impeached. Which ones?
Well, actually, my language is that if we held Supreme Court justices to the same ethics standards that we hold all other federal judges, there's a compelling case for the impeachment and removal of at least 2. And that would be Thomas and Alito. Their relationships with billionaires, their almost blatant corruption at this point, I think is very worthy of investigation and looking into with the same ethics standards that we hold every other judge to.
You've also said, if I have this correct, that Supreme Court justices should serve only 18 years, not lifetime appointments. Do I have that right?
Yes, I'm very much for term limits for Supreme Court justices. I think that lifeline.
Let me ask you about this in that sense. Ruth Bader Ginsburg served on the court for 27 years. Thurgood Marshall, 24 years. Earl Warren, 16 years. But Earl Warren went on the record after retiring from the court saying he wished he never had, that he should have stayed on the court to preserve the court's orientation that he saw, which was a liberal/progressive one, as Chief Justice. So with that as context, and I imagine you think those are all 3 substantially important justices in the history of the Supreme Court, why 18 years?
Yes. Because I think that lifetime appointments are inherently undemocratic. That's why. And one of my issues with kind of structures is that you wind up with situations where you can always point to it and say, well, if it would have been good because of these very specific people that were in it. And that could be true. But other times we find ourselves with we don't always have the Warren Court. And I do think that putting in term limits and structural impediments to people staying forever and allowing far more significant input from the the elected bodies of our government, whether it be the executive or the legislative, that is inherently a more democratic outcome. And I'm always kind of looking for structural fixes to make our democracy more democratic.
Before I let you go, since this is Artemis II Day, Graham, if you're in the Senate and you had to choose or prioritize, as sometimes you're going to ask to be doing when it comes to budgets and spending, what's more important to you, Medicare for all or future NASA missions to the moon and Mars?
Medicare for all.
Not close?
Not even close. Providing health care to Americans, giving people good lives full of dignity and fulfillment, that comes before anything else, in my opinion.
Graham Platner, you're always welcome on the program. I hope this is the first of several conversations.
Thank you very much, Major. I appreciate it.
Coming up, First Lady Melania Trump did something very unusual yesterday. She surprised many reporters and some in the Trump White House by talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Our political reporter panel will join me next to talk about that and a lot more. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Reporter panel time. Let me introduce them to you. Mario Parker, managing editor for Bloomberg. Alex Eisenstadt, senior political reporter for Axios. And before we came on, Alex said, did anyone ever eat the candy during the show? The answer is yes, and I'll show you how you do it. You see, you unwrap it, then you ask a question, and
Major
then
Garrett
you eat.
eating candy
then you eat while
on
someone
air.
else is talking. So, Alex, what'd you think of the Graham Platner interview?
I thought it was really interesting. You know, I'm sorry.
That's how it goes, baby.
You know, it's interesting because you have to see.
He looks very confident.
He looks confident, but there's also these parallels with Trump, right? In that he's obviously a Democrat and he's a liberal Democrat, but like Trump, he's running as a populist. And like Trump, he has all this, there's controversy in his background.
Baggage.
There's lots of baggage. He's made lots of statements that people would find offensive, right? But he's kind of getting through it. And in fact, he has endorsements from people like AOC, from people like Bernie Sanders. And I think
even Martin Heinrich in New Mexico,
correct.
Ruben Gallego in Arizona.
And they're defying Chuck Schumer's wishes in this race. And I think what you're seeing is how populist, if you're running as a populist, you don't necessarily have to play by the same set of rules as more traditional candidates,
and maybe
right?
Mario,
the paradigm shifting here.
And maybe Mario in the Trump era, baggage that used to seem really heavy 12 20 years ago isn't as heavy as it
I
used
was
to
just
be.
about to say that off of Alex's point. Not only do voters want a populist message, but some of those flaws, at least speaking right now, some of those flaws are in some ways to voters a sign of authenticity. So if you see a candidate like Graham Platner, like in your interview just a few minutes ago, where he acknowledged some of the missteps that he's made and said that, you know what, I've grown from those, et cetera, right? So some of that is just appealing to the authenticity that voters want. They're tired of, and I think one thing that Trump showed is that they're tired of some of the just...
Don't like all the polish.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why they like this show. No polish. It's none whatsoever. All right, I want to read the emails that were exchanged, not many, that are in the Epstein files between Ghislaine Maxwell and Melania Trump. Melania writes, Dear G, how are you? Nice story about J.E., meaning Jeffrey Epstein, in New York Mag. You look great on the picture, blah, blah, blah. Ghislaine Maxwell writes back, Sweet Pea, thanks for your message. Actually, plans changed, and I'm now on my way back to New York. Are they going to be able to get together? No, they're not. But what's important, I think, here is professional correspondence does not begin Dear G or Sweet Pea. They knew each other. They're friends. And Melania went out of her way yesterday to say, whatever you might hear in the future about me isn't true. How was Washington processing this, Alex?
Well, first of all, anytime Melania Trump says anything, it's notable because she doesn't say much, right?
Right,
and
super cautious, even by First Lady standards.
So I would say two things here, right? Well, number one, the question is what is there some kind of story coming that she's trying to get ahead of, or a book? What is it that she trying to get out ahead of something so she can frame the news ahead of time, right? The second thing is what we know about Melania Trump is that she is very, very, and her team are very attuned to her image, right? And they're very protective of it. And so we've seen Melania Trump's legal team has come out and attacked reports that she's somehow linked to Jeffrey Epstein in some way. But we haven't really heard her come out and do it. And so based upon some conversations I had with people yesterday, she felt a desire to come out and say something on her own and not just rely on lawyers to do so.
Mary, I want to shift the focus a little bit because we had very important inflation news and consumer confidence news today. Not good news for this White House, not good news for the economy writ large.
Yeah, fastest pace in 4 years.
Of inflation.
Of inflation, fastest pace in 4 years. Consumer sentiment plunged to record lows. None of this is really surprising. In fact, it's affirming just given what we saw with the unfolding of their war with Iran, right? Gasoline prices shot up over $1 a gallon or so. You go to the gasoline pump, you're paying about $4 a gallon for the cheap stuff, right? You're closer to $5 for premium. And you're seeing that weigh on everything from, again, travel to food prices to fertilizer costs for farmers. That's making its way through the system. And to Alex's point, I know he has a great article out just on spending and fundraising. This will be an issue. The economy will be central to this.
Let's pull those two things together, two stories you've recently published. One about a personnel change of significance within the White House to deal with the political atmosphere ahead and the big cash-on-hand advantage Republicans still possess.
Right. So it's going to be a fascinating election because we have never seen a scenario where one party has so much money and such an advantage in terms of resources, but is at the same time facing such a treacherous political climate. And so this is going to be a perfect case study for whether money can surmount a bad
momentum or atmosphere.
Correct.
And James Blair is going to leave the White House and take on a political role for the president.
Correct. So James Blair, who's an incredibly important person in the White House, very close to Susie Wiles, was very chief of staff, very high up on Trump's 2024 campaign. He's going to be taking a leave of absence from the White House to go work on the midterms outside. And so it's an important move just given how high up he is in the building.
And the interesting sequence of events for our audience, Alex wrote it, then the president confirmed it. That's always a cool way for things to play
That's
out.
how it goes, right?
Alex Eisenstadt, Mario Parker, great to both have you here. Take all the candy because it doesn't eat yourself. Coming up, Anthropic says it's created a new AI model simply too dangerous to release to the general public. We'll explain what Mythos is and why it is worrying those in the cybersecurity world. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Anthropic, which is a heavy hitter in the artificial intelligence world, has announced that it is teaming up with tech giants to, in its words, quote, secure the world's most critical software. What are they securing it from, you might wonder? Anthropic's own AI model called Mythos. Mythos has already found vulnerabilities in, quote, every major operating system and web browser that it's interacted with. And for that reason, fearing that bad actors, if this were out in the public domain, could exploit Mythos's capabilities, Anthropic says it is not releasing it just yet. It's a heck of a story. New York Times reporter Mike Isaac joins us now to explain. So, Mike, walk us through the basics. What Mythos is, what it's been allowed to encounter in the software world, and what are the implications?
So yeah, Mythos is the latest what's called model from Anthropic, a Silicon Valley startup, one of the most, I would say, buzzy AI startups out in San Francisco right now. And with each of these models, they're getting a bit more sophisticated in what they're able to do. You know, it's a type of research called reasoning, which allows them to, think a little bit further ahead than each last one. But Mythos is kind of different because this is very specifically focused on digging into operating systems for everything from desktops to smartphones to, different systems inside the government, and finding any possible vulnerabilities inside them. And I was reading about this as they had released it, and they had made notes that some software that's been around for decades, Mythos found bugs in it, vulnerabilities that were critical in just a few hours of digging through it. So it's really, I think it's probably smart of them to not give it to anyone if this can immediately find security flaws in the world's most important and powerful software.
So Anthropic is not an altruistic entity. It is doing this on a cost-saving basis for now. But when this is perfected, as I understand it, Mike, it will charge a pretty high rack rate.
I mean, you could also say this is one of their most effective marketing campaigns ever, right?
You might also say that, yes.
I called around to some of the big tech companies. Right now, they're not releasing it. They're only allowing like the big tech companies, some of the banks to use it. And I called around and I said, is this real? Is this hype? Anthropic is filled with a bunch of people who are often saying this is very dangerous and AI is going to harm us. And they kind of landed somewhere in the middle. They said, look, this is actually finding real security issues that we need to take seriously. Anthropic is often seen as like the Chicken Little of Silicon Valley, but this is actually important stuff in how the infrastructure of the world works.
Two people not named Chicken Little, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, and the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent, met, we are told, we have confirmed at CBS News, with a large number of very large banks to discuss Mythos and vulnerabilities, because there is a sense, Mike, if I have this correct, that if vulnerabilities are exploited, lots of global finance could be at some level compromised.
I think that's totally right. And this is one of the things, too, that a lot of these very important financial systems and the stuff that our bank accounts essentially are running on, or our 401ks, are running on software that's been around for a very long time, increasingly large and complicated to support, millions, if not billions of customers. And that means there's just like a lot of holes in it. That's millions of lines of code that now with these AI models, you don't have to have like a security researcher like me. I'm not a researcher, but like an engineer looking through it. You sick your little robots, a crowd of robots out into the world to dig through it. And in hours, you can find crazy flaws. So I think there's a real sense of urgency, and like there's real legitimate, concerns by the big banks. And I'm pretty impressed, I would say, that the government is moving as quickly as they are on this sort of stuff, considering they may not have done so, just a few years ago.
Mike, very quickly, if AI were smart enough, and this is the central question to its future, how smart will it get? Could it not only detect vulnerabilities, but create them in themselves within software programs?
That's right. I think that's the sort of threat, and all of the testing of all of these robots that you see out here is done basically in like internet clean rooms. They can't attach it to the internet to get out, and it's kind of like that movie Life, where they have to keep the alien in the box so it doesn't destroy everything. I think I'm starting to believe it's a little more real each day.
The alien in the box. We're going to leave it right there. Mike Isaacs, the New York Times. Thank you very much. And no one has a cooler room raider on this program than you do, good sir. Thank you very much. It is day 2 of golf's biggest tournament. We will get an update from our Jim Axelrod, lucky enough to get the assignment to cover all the action from Augusta National. More on the Masters when we come back. Welcome back to Takeout. Working with the Conversation Corner. The Masters has a lot of things. An exceedingly polite crowd that roars with the best of them. Of course, a legendary and picturesque course. And the coveted green jacket. Not this one. This is just a off-the-rack thing. Nothing like the Masters. What network is that on? Oh, yeah, it's on CBS. Day 2 of action. Here's a look at the leaderboard. Right now, defending champion Rory McIlroy, 2-stroke lead, as I last checked before we came on. CBS News senior national correspondent, who, by the way, is my journalistic brother from another mother, Jim Axelrod, joins me from Augusta, Georgia. How's day 2 been, Jim? Tell me all about it. Wish I were there. I mean, I really wish I were there.
Yeah, you know what? Everybody gives me a hard time for this assignment. I've been to Iraq. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been in a Macedonian jail. My conscience is clean. I just want to start out with that.
As now, it should be, good sir.
The storylines here are awesome. The weather on a 1 to 10, the weather's an 11. You've got a leaderboard that is full of some of the best players in the world. It looks like it's going to be an amazing weekend. Through the first 2 rounds, Major, the story is definitely Rory McIlroy, who is playing with a lightness, a freedom. You know, he won last year, completed the green jacket, won for the first time after 17 tries. And to quote the great Chris Christopherson, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Rory's got nothing left to lose. He's won the Grand Slam, and he's playing like a guy with nothing left to lose. He's playing free. He's playing liberated. And that means trouble for the rest of the field here at Augusta.
The course is much hillier than it looks like on television, and the greens are treacherous. And I've heard, Jim, that the greens are particularly treacherous, drying up earlier than normal because it's been a little bit dry there. Walk us through that.
Yeah. Yeah, so this seems to be what will be the determining factor over the weekend. We see right now a lot of work being done on the course, some spraying down, hosing down of some of the greens. I think there is a concern. I mean, no one's ever sorry to see fast greens at Augusta. It just makes it all the more compelling to watch as the best players in the world are having trouble and challenged in a way that few other courses ever will. We watch today as players are taking an extraordinary amount of time, care, and effort to make sure that whatever the other challenges are at Augusta, that putting gets everybody's best attention. And you'll see that over the weekend because the course is only going to get faster and quicker and more challenging.
20 seconds, Jim Axelrod. Brooks Koepka is lurking.
No.
No.
I'll take that bet, Major, right now if you want to make that, right?
Okay.
You got Rory, you have Sam Burns, Patrick Reed, and Tommy Fleetwood. Just keep an eye on all of them for the weekend.
Jim Axelrod, face planting me right on my own show like a true master. Thank you, my brother. Have a great weekend. Happy Green Jacket Friday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. My pleasure to let you know the Daily Report coming your way next.